Sometimes we forget why we're here. It's easy to fall off track. These help us remember.
These battle scars don't look like they're fading, don't look like they're ever gone away. They ain't never gonna change. These battles.
Growing up, I had a dream, something no one else could see. Tell me what it means when your faith is falling beneath your knees and you can't breathe. Everything you see reminds you of what you're not or something you won't be. You gotta take what you're given, that's how we live it. Don't be mad at the system, it's simply how we've existed. I hear a lot of people talking like they politicians and choose to be an accountant because it's safe in a business. Not because they wanna do it, just because they heard it pays. And who the fuck wants to be poor knowing that's how we've been raised? Society is getting heavy, I can feel the weight. The pressure of success is like 100 million pounds of shame. And that's the reason I'm staying up late, trying to find a way to escape the stereotypes. This day and age is making me feel like the only way I'll be happy is getting signed to a label and making money through rapping. I wanna share my emotion because this world is attacking the very principle of life that lets the people be happy. If you don't have a reason to breathe, why even live? Battle scars are impressions of everything that it is.
Don't look like they're fading, don't look like they're ever gone away. They ain't never gonna change. These battle scars don't look like they're fading, don't look like they're ever gone away. They ain't never gonna change. These battles.
Now, if I had a voice that reached 100 million people, I'd tell them there's a reason that we're all created equal. Cause some decide to be great and some decide a sequel to an average person's life is simply what they want to be. So you make your decision, all I know is what I'm given. Won't define the life I lead or the way I dwell in existence. I've seen a greater image on the walls of where I'm living, and the words twisted and scripted remind me of something written. Faith is a gift that is given down to the people. If one believes it, one receives it. It's given if it is needed. Don't ever think you're trapped in a life that you never wanted. Your options are infinite, that's some mathematical logic. I'm not saying I'm a prophet, I'm speaking for what it's worth. These lyrics define my prayers and these battle scars on my church. Not saying I'm a prophet, I'm speaking for what it's worth. These lyrics define my prayers, these battle scars on my church.
Don't look like they're fading, don't look like they're ever gone away. They ain't never gonna change. These battle scars don't look like they're fading, don't look like they're ever gone away. They ain't never gonna change. These battles.
Okay, it looks like I might have done it actually right this time, where I didn't bring Steve in immediately. So hello, H. Reardon. I do see you there, and I'm kind of like not centered. That my OCD is bothering me. All right, we're trying this again. And I made my husband run. I didn't make him. He offered. My husband's the best person in the entire world. He ran Ethernet cable down because I swear it was my Wi-Fi. So he actually, at least for tonight, we need to do it a little better. Put down some Ethernet cable so that we would have a smooth show tonight. I'm going to be bringing Steve on in one moment, doing the preliminaries. Along the bottom is my Patreon. As always, if you can, please consider becoming a patron. I am $26 a month away from a major milestone. I did make up for the lost patrons from people who just couldn't do it anymore, so thank you. So now I'm working towards the milestone I was working towards before, and I'm $26 away. So if you could help, I would truly appreciate it. In the low bar, I'm not going to talk about it. There are other ways you can support this show. Let me get this off the screen because I always find that obnoxious to be sitting there. So I'm going to let Steve, he's going to have to restate his intro from last time, unfortunately. But the purpose of the show tonight was the issue of when should we be nominating our presidential candidates. We are fortunate that we are a growing party, and we always have a lot of new people coming along who always have some great ideas, but sometimes the ideas are ideas that have been tried before and abandoned. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't try them again. But the one thing we should do is ask why they were abandoned before. And if circumstances haven't changed, that's probably a good indication that we should keep things as they are. But perhaps the reasons we abandoned them in the past are no longer valid. So it's always worth re-examining. So let me see if I can be successful. So first thing I need to do is bring up the frames. It's going to look weird for a minute until I bring Steve on. So here I am. In the middle of a bunch of frames here, but if I set this up right, when I add Steve, yes. And let me...
There we go.
Perfect. Alrighty, so is there church bells going on somewhere?
No, that's the mantle clock.
Oh,
it just went
okay.
off for it's a little bit running a little bit late, so it just chimed for 9 o'clock.
Okay, perfect. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to ask you to give your intro again because last time was unsalvageable. So you have the floor.
That's all right. Of course, it won't be exactly the same. I should point out that my most recent, the thing people would know me being involved from most recently is that I was the campaign manager for Joe Jorgensen. And so, and Spike Cohen, the Jorgensen-Cohen campaign. And so I've experienced the presidential campaign from that perspective. And I've been involved in a couple other presidential campaigns as well. But my involvement in the party goes back to 1979. I had been involved with a friend of mine in starting a campus group in 1974, but we weren't affiliated with the party. It was just a SIL, Students for Individual Liberty. And so it wasn't until 79 that my friend Joe Hauptman and I decided to bite the bullet and join the LP and get involved politically. He'd given up on the Republicans. I'd given up on the Democrats. And so he was the one that actually made the phone call to the national headquarters asking, who's running the Clark campaign here in Indiana? We'd like to get involved. We're, new members. And their response was, funny you should ask. And the next thing we knew, Joe was running the Clark campaign in Indiana, and I was assisting him. So, and I'm sure that there are many of your listeners have gotten a job in the party, a volunteer position in the party in a similar manner. Since that time, I've been a candidate for public office 7 times, including running for Secretary of State in Indiana, where the first time we gained ballot status. And of course, the response from the Democrats and Republicans was to quadruple the requirement for staying on the next time. Totally surprised that would never happen. But I've also served 2 terms as state chair in Indiana. And then I also served one term as, I finished a term in Virginia as the state chair after I'd moved there. Served on the national committee from 1983 to 85 to 93 as regional rep and then vice chair. And then I was chair from 93 to 98. And then incoming chair David Berglund hired me as the executive director for the party. And I continued in that position under Jim Clark. And then I stayed for a few months under Jeff Neal and then left to do other things.
Wow.
So
you've been around a long time. And as we joked last time, you go to a Libertarian Party meeting, you leave with a title. Maybe if you're
That's
lucky,
right.
it's just one. And my line always, when anyone asks me why isn't something being done, I'm like, thank you for volunteering.
Exactly.
And then people learn not to ask me why things are not being done.
And I probably should point out that I'm currently serving as the Greenville County Chair here in South Carolina and working on candidate recruitment for the state.
Yeah, I've got the trifecta of secretary roles right now. I'm county, state, and national.
There you go.
And anyone in comments, remember my shows are always participatory. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to comment and ask away. Because the length of the show, it's going to be under an hour, but the length of how much over or under under, but you know what I'm saying, has to do with you guys. So from correct me where I'm wrong, because this is just me looking back on history. We used to have odd number conventions from the time the party started. Well, they had them every year for a while, but
Right. They had them every year for a while. And then we went to every 2 years on odd years. And that was almost entirely due to ballot access considerations. At that time, we would start a presidential cycle with, maybe somewhere in the teens in terms of ballot act qualified state, much different than we are today. And so, and that was before we'd won a lot of our lawsuits. So there were states, for example, that did not allow substitution, but had very early deadlines. And so the only way to comply with the law and get our candidates on the ballot was to nominate essentially a year ahead of the election, to be able to spend all that time on ballot access. And pretty much the time was spent on ballot access. Those who think that if we started earlier, that would give the candidate more time to get involved, that was not what was involved back then. It was almost entirely ballot access. And one of the things we discovered was that there was really no interest in who our nominee was that early in the process. The media just cared less than they care now. And people that now are looking for alternative candidates weren't looking that early. They were still looking, they still had hope that maybe the Democrats or the Republicans would nominate somebody decent before they'd gone through the process and found that no, it's the same old crap that they've nominated in the past. So the transition occurred in the mid-90s, right about the time that I served as chair, but it had already been decided before that. And Andre Maru was nominated in 91 for the 92. And then the next time, Harry Brown was nominated in 96 in a similar time frame. Yes.
Okay. First time
so
Joe
they were
Jorgensen. Okay, gotcha.
That's right. And that campaign turned out to be the second best that we'd ever done, second only to Ed Clark campaign in 1980. And of course, again, for those who've been around, the Clark campaign in 1980 had the benefit. This is just after they passed campaign finance reform and limited the donations that you could make. At that time, it was to $1,000 was the most anybody could donate. But there was a loophole. The candidates could donate spend as much as they wanted to. And so billionaire David Koch agreed to run as the VP candidate purely so that he could pump a couple of $1 million into the campaign. And this was also at the time when the television networks had limits. There were the SEC limited commercial time. And so, but the networks could sell blocks of 5 minutes and have it considered programming and not count against their commercials. And so every election cycle, candidates would buy these 5-minute blocks for relatively cheap. It was like $25,000 for a network, ABC, CBS, NBC ad. And the Clark campaign bought something like 60 of those in the weeks coming up. And that's frankly the major reason that they did so well. They had a very good message, a very good messenger, and they had a whole bunch of television ads at a time when there were only 3 networks, and they were able to be on all of them.
And I think I've got a lot of those reels. I got in a box of Clark campaign stuff. Somebody had it. I don't know. They just shipped it, and it was all of these tapes, which we need to now get converted, which isn't cheap because I think it's 2-inch broadcast reels. And yes. Those degrade, and yeah, there's issues. Though I do have some of them converted, I believe, that were in the LP's possession. Right. So 96 is when it changed?
Well, the decision had been done before that. In other words, by the time we got to the 91 convention, by the time we got to the 93 convention, it had been decided that the next convention was going to be 96. The bylaws had been amended so that there's a window that allows either for nominating the year before or the year of. That is, the window that had been in there before was expanded to allow us to go in the year, but the early time was not taken away. So we still have the ability to move back if we ever wanted to. And the reason we made the change was two. Number one, we now had ballot access in many more states, and we won court decisions, so it was no longer necessary to nominate that far in advance. We had the ability to get 50 states, and in fact, we were on the ballot in all 50 states in 92, 96. Technically, in 2000, one state decided to nominate somebody besides our normal nominee, Arizona, right? But nonetheless, the problem there wasn't a ballot access problem, and the thought was, and I think has turned out to be correct, is that by nominating later in the process, there would be more attention paid at the time we nominate, and we get more of a boost from that. And in fact, that is, I believe, what's happened. Now, I think that probably we would benefit by moving the nomination up a couple of months. But if we were to move it back to where we did before, the year of, I think we would lose that. Again, our experience before was that nobody cared at that point in the process. When voters and the media start caring is after it becomes pretty clear that your choice is going to be Biden versus Trump or Clinton versus Trump. And it's at that point they go, the public goes, God, isn't there anybody else? And the media goes, okay, that story's over. What's a new story we can look for? And so sometime late March, beginning of April, there opens up this window for interest in third parties, and it largely closes at the conventions for the Democrats and Republicans. So that's the window we have to really get the most benefit out of selecting our nominee and getting out on the campaign trail.
Okay. So when were the bylaws? I don't think I went back far enough, because I think I went back to, I think, 93, and I saw it was the bylaw for conventions is exactly as the same as it is today. So was it amended in 91?
I think so. I think it was 91, could have been 89, but I think it was 91 where we began to talk about the idea of moving the nomination, and the 91 convention changed the bylaws to allow it to happen, but we didn't actually move the nomination itself. It's possible it was either 89 or 91.
Okay,
I don't
I'm going to have to look that up, because I've got right here, I did screenshot. Let me see, which one is this? This is our current one I have up on the screen, so Article 10, and it does allow us to do it the year before, which for some reason I didn't realize. I had thought it only allowed us to do it on even years, so it says July of an odd number year through August of an even number year. And I don't know why I didn't notice that in 2020 when we were all arguing about, because the delay.
And I should point out, it's possible that bylaw had been widened earlier than that. There just had been never any thought about doing it. They may have looked ahead and made that change earlier. I honestly don't remember. I just know that by the time we actually were making the decision to go to the nomination in 96 versus 95, that the bylaw had already been made to allow that to happen.
Okay, awesome. I'm going to need to look that up, because here I think was the 93 one, which is exactly the same thing. It's nothing has changed.
Right.
In fact, the only thing that's really changed with conventions, at least in this section, obviously it's a different article number, is we now no longer allow special conventions. I think that was deleted in 2018.
Right, and I don't think we'd either never had one or we'd had like one. They were basically a convention where you weren't going to do any business. It was just the opportunity to sort of have the equivalent of Freedom Fest.
And we can do that anyway.
That's right.
Because we're doing that kind of at the end of August with the 50th celebration type thing. It's a national sponsored event that they're selling tickets to, that everyone's coming from all over the country with no business. Sounds like a special convention to me.
Exactly.
Okay, so I actually have another question for you that's nothing to do with campaigns to pick your brain on, though you might not know, but I corner people on this particular one. So it seemed to me back then we got more media attention than we do now. I don't know if that's just a perception with me looking back, but like I have a newspapers.com subscription, and when I'm doing my history podcast, I run searches for the time period I'm doing, and we used to get a ton of press.
Well, we had a lot of press in the time frame of 92, 93 through 2002, for large part because we had a full-time communication director. We were putting out press releases regularly. Our executive director was doing interviews. The chair was doing interviews, and the political director, communications director were all doing interviews. I think we averaged maybe 2 or 3 a day, mostly radio. We did some TV, some newspaper. I know that right before I left as executive director, I was on Crossfire 2 or 3 times in succession, which is an interesting show. But I think that was both sides of the change. The media tended to be based on what you were doing to attract media, and not the campaign itself. I don't recall any of our. I know that, for example, there was a little bit of a boost during the 91 convention. That was the first 91 convention was the first time C-SPAN covered us, and that's the one there where during the first break we found some cardboard, and wrote the 800 number and taped it to the podium so that when they started broadcasting again, the 800 number would be up there, and our headquarters got flooded with calls, which was a good thing. But but after that one burst, there was not a particularly large interest in the presidential campaign for quite a while. And in fact, partway through that campaign, for reasons that are not worth getting into in this broadcast, most of the staff was fired, and 3 members of the national committee were selected to come in and basically run the campaign. And I was one of the 3. There was Steve Alexander, Steve Givet, and me. So everybody referred to us the 3 Steves. But we were definitely not being overwhelmed with media coverage prior to our coming in, and not overwhelmed afterwards, although we did manage to get some television ads on the air.
Well, I can tell you guys, when you were chair and executive director, I believe, the press release game was fire, man. I was working on them just before the show, adding more to Lpedia, because I have some volunteers who were getting some scanned in. And anyone should go to Lpedia and look up Index of National Party Press Releases. You would wish, I know I'm not going to ask you to criticize anything. I know it's a ticklish position. I'll criticize. The current LNC could learn something, because...
Well, that really is Bill Winter. Bill Winter was a former chair of the New Hampshire LP, and he was brought on when I was vice chair. So my predecessor, Mary Jingle, and the executive director then, which was Stuart Regis, hired Bill as the communications director. And he really just, he made all of our communications look very professional. He understood that the purpose of a press release is to get somebody to pick up the phone and call you to get an interview, either to have you on the radio show, book you on a television show, run a print story. And so a lot of it was, how do you craft a headline and text in the briefs to cause them to call you and get you on to talk about libertarian issues. And in fact, I know this is kind of a digression from the topic of the show, but there's one example of just, I think people can really get a better understanding of how to go about doing press releases. There was this, I don't remember if anybody remembers this, but there was an Air Force officer, Kelly Flynn, who there was an issue with her having an adulterous affair with her commanding officer. And there was a period of time when this was the only thing anybody was talking about. And so the question is, okay, well, this is the only thing anybody wants to talk about, has nothing to do with libertarianism. How can we manage to piggyback on this? And Bill Winter came up with the classic headline, like Kelly Flynn, you too may be a sex criminal. And what he did was talked about the fact that adultery is against the law in X number of states. And there's all these other things, sex crimes, that are against the law in other states. He used a lot of Peter McWilliams' book, Ain't Nobody's Business If You Do. And so he'd get in there, spend about 2 or 3 minutes talking about Kelly Flynn, and the rest of it was all about all of these ridiculous laws that states have against various and sundry sex acts that government has no business being involved in.
I'm gonna have to see if we have that one scanned. I told you my favorite one is the one entitled Tempest in a Toilet Bowl.
Yes.
There was more toilet bowl puns in that one.
Yeah.
Then
Bill Winter was very good at drafting
Oh,
those
I mean,
puns.
it was groan worthy, but hilarious. And that is up on Lpedia. I'll probably shove a link to it in the show notes because that is my absolute favorite one, where it just talked about the country going down the crapper. I mean, everything was just hilarious on it. And I actually used that when I was, still am, angry at the LNC for its silence on COVID. I'm like, they got lathered up over low flow toilets and tanning beds, okay? And y'all can't be motivated. Okay, never mind. I'll get going.
Well, and today, the equivalent is, and this is something that one of the people that worked on our campaign, Caitlin Cloven, was just outstanding at, was looking at what was trending the day of that day, and finding, putting something on social media that would piggyback on that and generate traffic and end up getting people signed up. And the person who followed her did that same type of thing as well. But that's sort of the modern equivalent of what's talk radio talking about, and how do we piggyback on that and get booked. So hopefully, now that we have a full-time communication director again, finally, that hopefully the LP will be able to again get that higher visibility in the media.
And she really hasn't had a chance to prove herself, because she came on right as the unfortunate events of June transpired. And for those of you who are new, like, the unfortunate events of June are nothing in the scale of LP. Well, I'm not going to say the New Hampshire thing, because I still think that was one of the worst things that the National Party's ever done. But in the terms of just drama and emotional strom and therm, that wasn't nothing. It actually came and went very quickly. Like you mentioned, where you three had to go into the office. It's political parties. We're not the only one, too. If we were talking with Republicans right now, they would have their story, too. We need to just not get too perturbed.
Well, just keep in one of the things that we would always bring up when somebody would criticize one of our candidates for being, kind of out there, going, well, David Duke was the Republican nominee for Louisiana governor, and a group of LaRoucheites were the Democratic nominees for lieutenant governor and lower offices, the lower statewide offices in Illinois. So on the general scheme of things, our not normal candidates I'd much rather have those candidates than the ones that show up on the Democratic and Republican tickets.
Oh, for certain, So what would you say, though, to get back on the whole thing of nominating earlier, besides the media attention thing? Because when we were, the reason why, I immediately thought that you're the one to answer this is because of that long talk we had after the last peaceful moment that the LNC had in June, which was the LNC meeting, which was a hug fest. You were there. Yep. We were so collegial. And then next week we were trying to throw people off. It was wonderful. But you gave a great explanation, and it dealt with a lot of different things, also like donor fatigue and fundraising and things like that. So what are some other pitfalls, do you think, besides the media just not caring the year before?
Right. The donor fatigue is one. When you're nominating that early, almost all of your support is coming from your existing party base. There isn't the interest out there among the general public, and so all your fundraising is coming from your regular donors, and fairly quickly the people that are going to donate have donated, and so you start to have trouble as you're trying to ramp up the campaign and ramp up your staffing. You're having trouble raising the money to support that. Whereas, for example, what we saw here is we had an explosion of party support that came in like immediately. Mm-hmm. People had been just waiting in the wings, waiting for us to have a nominee so they could to donate. But then that in turn gave us the resources to go out, and ours was very much an outreach-oriented campaign. So by the time we were done, 3/4 of our donors were people that were not on the party's database. These are people that, when Dan Fishman did a comparison against our donor base and the LP's database, 3/4 of the people weren't there. And so, we didn't see that kind of explosion of interest from people outside the party back when we were nominating so early. And by the time we got to the point where there would be interest, it was sort of like old news. Oh yeah, though that person's been around for several months and they haven't been getting any press. They're not going anywhere. Whereas what we saw here was a burst there was a burst of publicity, a burst of fundraising. Now there are things we could have done better to capitalize on that. And I do think that having that burst occur a little bit earlier in the cycle than we're currently doing probably would be wise. Again, I think that the window opens about the time the Democrats and Republicans have their nominees more or less determined. So call it Super Tuesday in March. If we were to nominate shortly thereafter, that's probably the ideal. We've sort of gotten in the habit of doing it on holiday weekends because it means that, well, two things. One, it means that people who want to attend have one less day they have to take off from work. So it makes it a little easier for some people to attend that couldn't otherwise. And secondly, those are usually weekends that are harder for hotels and convention centers to fill. And so you can oftentimes get better deals on those weekends than others. But I think we probably have reached a point where those benefits are offset by the benefits of nominating a little bit early. And of course, there's a third option that we might want to consider, and that is to do a modification of what we ended up doing for necessity this year, which is choosing our nominee electronically online ahead of the actual convention, so that by the time the convention rolls around, the party's united, and you have a situation where instead of people licking their wounds and feeling bad that their candidate lost, you've got the opportunity for the entire party to come together and support the nominee, which is what we saw this time. It's what you see with the Democrats and Republicans. Pretty much by the time their convention rolls around, it's a love fest for whoever the nominee is. And it also means you're not trying to do presidential and vice presidential nominations on top of platform and bylaws, because what ends up inevitably happening is platform and bylaws get short-shifted, get shortchanged on time.
Or at-large elections do.
Oh yeah, or the elections.
Or the judicial committee.
Yeah, that too. And so if I got to be the person who just to pen the way we're going to do it, I would look at having a series of televised debates like we did here, particularly like the ones we did with that Kentucky hosted, but having a series of some Zoom and then some in person. Have some of those in January and February, and then get the delegates together electronically in late March. After you've gotten some interest generated, maybe some press watching our debates, and do the nomination. And then you've got a couple of months between then and say May for the campaign to start, the candidates to start traveling the country, doing something like the bus tour that we did here, bringing in non-libertarian support for the campaign and for the party. But we've already got your delegates selected, so you're not going to have the individuals immediately put in a position of doing decision making for platform and bylaws and things like that. And then have the convention. And I know that there's some people think, well, oh, if we don't have the presidential nomination, we won't get the turnout at the convention. But we have conventions every other year that don't have presidential nominations, and people come to those. So I really don't think that's an issue.
Something that some people might think is snooty. To me, I'd rather have more people there to nominate the presidential candidate rather than bylaws and platform, which is a much narrower interest and skill set. Sometimes we get some really crappy bylaws or platform things proposed from the floor from people that would probably be better off not messing with bylaws and platform.
Well, and the other thing that can be an issue, it hasn't always been, it wasn't this time, but if you've got a nominating convention where there is one candidate who is dominating the convention, basically, you've got a situation where somebody's going to be winning the nomination on the first ballot with 50-60% of the vote, which is what you had, for example, when Harry Brown ran in 96. I think he got it on the first ballot with 60% of the vote. Essentially, that candidate's campaign team, floor team, has extraordinary power on things like platform and bylaws. And,
which I think needs to be pretty independent of a candidate.
Exactly. And I think that if you are choosing the candidate and then that's already been done by the time the convention comes in, then I think you're more likely to see a more representative convention of the party membership as whole, not being overwhelmed by there's needing to have people there that are going to vote for your presidential candidate.
I tend to agree, but I think that would require some serious structural changes in the party to do that.
Well, the biggest thing was you would have to have a mechanism. First off, you'd have to have a mechanism for doing a remote convention, or at least a remote business. The mechanism we had worked reasonably well once we got past the idea of whether you could. Well, I'm saying that from my perspective as a delegate, once you actually got to the convention part itself, not the day before arguing over all of it, then the actual procedures ran fairly smoothly. The voting ran pretty smoothly. The speeches ran pretty smoothly. Those things, but we can't go through another convention where we have no procedures when a situation like this happens. So hopefully our delegates will put those procedures in place, whether it's just an emergency type of thing or whether they actually want to try utilizing them next time around for the presidential, vice presidential pick, because the convention itself really can't be moved. It needs to be where it is. There's contracts in place. The moving the convention in 2024 really isn't an option.
No, because we don't sign that contract.
That's right.
A lot of people don't realize that the convention, the LNC was not even going to be in place at the time of the convention as the one negotiating contracts for future conventions.
That's how it's been certainly since I've been involved. So,
and we did Reno and 2024 at the same time, which is going to be in DC. Because we got a really good rate by doing it so far. Because DC's normally out of our price range, as you know. So yeah, a lot of
people, used to be.
Yeah, well, it is now.
But we did in fact line them up pretty far in advance, and that's why we were able to get in there. And there was at least the first one we did there was able to be done in a hotel ballroom. We didn't at that time. The next time we had to go to a convention center because the delegate, this is before they redid the formula so that there was an effective cap on the number of delegates. And so we had to plan. What?
Oh, you're telling me new stuff? There didn't used to be an effective cap?
Well, the way it was so much for every so many members. So in theory, you had to plan. You had to think about, well, how many delegates could that potentially be? When
So
you
it
were,
wasn't as a percentage of the total members.
That's
'cause
correct.
Right now,
Yes, it's
1,050 is about, give or take 5.
yes.
Is kind
Yeah,
of our
and that was one of the
maximum.
changes that was put in place. I don't remember if it was when I was chair or when I was director, but that was put in place to make the conventions plannable, so that you knew how many people that you were trying to do a contract for. Because if you had a situation where, well, it could be 1,000 or it could be 2,000, that makes it darn near impossible to choose a venue, to be able to get a room block. All those things are extraordinarily difficult. And so that's why that change was made. And I think there's been some tweaking of it since then about how much of it's due to this versus that. But that overall cap was put in place. Like I said, I think sometime in the late 90s is when that was put in place.
You know, we might not have those, but we don't have all of our bylaws. I'm still finding them. If you have any at your house, turn them over.
Well, I know that you can find a bunch of them at the archive site from our old.
Yeah, I got all those, but we are
Okay.
still missing quite a few, and we're missing quite a few convention minutes, though I found some notes of some early ones in the 70s where they decided the tape recordings would be the minutes. That was nice.
Well, there was also, I know there was a situation we had with at least a couple of secretaries where we were not able to we were having trouble getting the secretaries to provide minutes from
Yeah, well, the
the
96
convention.
minutes, I think it was 96, no, 2006 minutes were still in draft when I came on board, and I'm like, let's
Right.
approve these.
Right.
I go, nobody remembers, but they're in draft on the website. No bueno. Yeah, that's all fun. So, in theory, with the donor fatigue, though it's in theory, a donor could max out in the odd number year and then max out again in the even number year.
No, that is not actually. Well, yeah,
Oh.
it's not the year. It's pre-nomination, post-nomination.
Oh.
So there is it is considered the primary election up until the actual nomination takes place. So in this case, up to the day that the midnight of the night that Spike was nominated, anybody who donated or postmarked their check or had the date on their check that day or before was considered primary, and the limit for that was $2,800 per person. And then after that point, anything was considered for the general election. So a person who gave $2,800 before the nomination could then give another $2,800 after the nomination. So
And nobody's going to be giving that before the year before so early, I don't think.
No, that's correct. It would be very, very difficult to, other than whatever the key supporters for the campaign candidate were, but you simply would not get that many. So anyway, that's a benefit that by having a lot of people make those donations prior to, you have at least some number of people that are in a position to give twice.
Right. Okay.
Again, since of course the Democrats and Republicans have put these limits on that prevent individuals from donating to candidates while leaving super PACs and all these other things, all the dark monies available for pretty much unlimited that they and their cronies can do. But for individuals supporting anybody, including the Democratic and Republican candidates themselves, you've got the limit, which means that even among the Democrats and Republicans, it puts more power in the hands of groups that are not affiliated with the campaign than the campaigns themselves.
Right.
And
so
you
also mentioned candidate fatigue, where you're already asking candidates to take so much of their life. So if you could go into that a little bit.
Well, I mean, a candidate, ideally, you want your candidate campaigning full-time, available full-time. So that they have to be able to take a leave of absence. If they're running their own business, they have to be able to take time away from that. You can have situations where candidates can get into financial difficulties because of the length involved. The length that they've got no income coming in can create situations where you have financial difficulties for the candidate, again, which is not a good situation to be in. And we've dealt with that situation before. And you also have, there's more time when you have the nomination later in the process. If there's a skeleton in somebody's closet, it's more likely to come out before the nomination than after. When you nominate the year before, it is more likely that somebody gets nominated and the skeletons come out after the nomination. And, that's not a good situation to be in. And we've dealt with that situation before.
Dave Davis, I think, misunderstood something you said, so I'm going to. I think I lost your sound. I think
I'm still
okay. Okay. So Dave Davis asked, wouldn't we have to bind delegates in order for the nominee to be determined by the time of convention? So I think he misunderstood what you were saying.
Yeah.
He was talking about a bifurcated convention again, Dave, where we would nominate our candidate the normal way electronically and then have a physical convention, which would be more of a celebration of the candidate and doing bylaws and platform.
Yeah, that was exactly the case.
Okay, awesome. Now I'm going to put you on the spot to ask you your opinion on something.
Okay. I may or may not answer.
If we got 5%, should the candidate take the welfare money or not?
Well, the reality is that we will not have any control over that. That will be a candidate decision.
A candidate
I
decision.
think that it is a candidate decision. Now, there's a separate issue about whether or not. No, that's right. There used to be an issue about the party getting funds for their convention, but I believe that's been eliminated. I don't think that the Democrats got it. I don't think that's an issue anymore. But it is the candidate who gets the funds retroactively for the first time, and then whoever the nominee would be would get the funds the next time around. Would be eligible for them, and the candidate would decide whether or not to accept them. So I certainly think it's the case that for people that have an opinion on that, that's a candidate question you want to ask the candidates about whether or not to do that.
Though the delegates could put a bylaw in place.
They could put a bylaw in place, but it's not going to affect
the candidate can ignore it.
That's right. That's exactly right. So, there are limits to. A lot of times, people want to try to put rules in place to guarantee the outcome they want, when the reality is that you have to try to get as many people as you can that agree with the outcome you want in order to do that.
Because the only way a bylaw would work, because I've given a lot of thought to this, it would have to be something that was automatic, and this would never pass. It would have to be something automatic in the bylaws that a candidate who takes it is automatically disqualified without action of the LNC. Because the LNC is never going to disqualify a ticket.
Well, but not only that, but you have to understand, even that doesn't make a difference, because the ballot access is controlled by the state parties, not by national. We learned that in Arizona.
We certainly did.
And once a candidate has been certified for a state ballot, the LNC doing anything is not going to have any effect on that whatsoever. And in some cases, it becomes too late for even the state party to do anything about it.
Right.
So, I think the reality is that delegates are going to have to ask the candidates those questions and see what they have to say. Now, of course, the interesting thing is we look, for example, this time around, it wasn't an issue. We weren't going to get it was pretty clear for the polling, we weren't going to get 5%. But if we had, our campaign was trying our very best to stay in the black. We ended up a little bit in the red, which took us a few months to erase. We are now in the black. But unlike
the Gary Johnson campaign. Oops, sorry.
Let's be fair. I believe the 2016 campaign is in the black. It's the 2012 that still has a debt, and that debt was almost entirely from the primary when he was still a Republican.
Didn't know that.
If you look at it, that debt that was in place, that they had the debt that they had when he switched parties and started pursuing our debt, that the debt at the end of the campaign was slightly less than what they had at the end of the when he switched parties. So,
and I did mean 2012. I did not mean 2016.
Yeah, but no, it's then there have been candidates in the past that would take the approach of, well, we're going to spend that money because we know we're going to get the 5%, and then we'll get it retroactively. Perot, I think in 96, because in 92 he didn't have a party associated with him, so he couldn't. The way it was structured, he couldn't get the money in 92 because he didn't check the right boxes. He did check them in 96, and so he did get the funds, and then he basically just loaned the campaign a bunch of money and then got some of it paid back. And then the Reform Party got money for the next time around, and of course you had everybody fighting over it.
Right,
and you had,
that's the thing.
Yeah, and you have candidates coming in seeking it. But the reality is that the way the law is written, that's going to happen. And the only way to, in my view, the only way to avoid it is to have the Libertarian Party itself be large enough that an outside entity simply can't take it over. And the problem is when you only got 20,000 members, it's a whole lot easier to take over than if you've got 50,000 or if you've got 100,000 or if you've got 200,000.
Right.
And so that's one of the reasons.
We do have some safeguards.
Of course.
And I tend to think, I might be flattering myself, that I helped solidify at least one of the safeguards by getting that alleged back door closed about the statement of principles that was tried to be exploited several times before. Even though it wasn't exploited by outside actors, it was attempted to be exploited by actual libertarians, but now it's not available to be exploited by anybody. But of course, people could just ignore it. But,
I was going to say the kind of people that we're worried about here,
right?
That would not be an impediment to them. Again, the people that we're concerned about, the people that are truly not libertarians. Right. And coming in, as opposed to somebody who's maybe not in the part of the libertarian quadrant that you might like, that's a different situation.
Right.
And I think that the real safeguard there is to have our conventions large enough, to have enough competition already for our delegates that, the modern day equivalent of a Pat Buchanan can't come in and swarm conventions with a bunch of his supporters and take over. And of course, there are some procedural things that help with that. If you have requirements that people have been members for a certain period of time, but before they are eligible to serve as delegates, I think that that's a protection. Having situations where the delegates are chosen in districts prevents like one geographical region of a state from swarming. I know we put that provision in place in Indiana.
And we did in Colorado as well.
Yeah.
Actually,
and
we
have it in South Carolina as well.
Yeah. Well, we don't do it. Okay. Ours is kind of weird in Colorado. We don't do it by districts, but unless the board invokes it by a certain date. So we have also a seasoning requirement. So if the board is paying attention, and we see something coming, we can invoke it to diffuse it. We don't do that automatically. It has to be invoked by the board. But if you saw the Colorado bylaws, you would see the paranoia completely through it.
Yeah. By the way, I noticed one question here about setting up a PAC or super PAC for the donors. And one thing that people just need to realize is that under law, the campaign cannot coordinate with those PACs. So those PACs have to operate entirely independent of the campaign. And so you will get whatever messaging that PAC decides to do, which may or may not link up with the messaging that your campaign is doing. Now, there is something else that can be done that expands the available pool for those donors. We talked about doing it this time. We didn't feel that we had enough. We didn't have the donors available to make it worth going through all the paperwork. But you can set up a joint fundraising committee, which involving the presidential campaign and one or more individual state parties, and then you effectively are able to combine the
Their
donation limits,
right?
Their limits, and so you're able to take larger contributions and spread them out. There's also the national party can do what are called coordinated expenditures. So that's money that they can in fact talk to the campaign about. I don't know what that limit. I believe the limit now is around 12 million, but I could be wrong. I may be a limit from earlier in the process, and so it may be greater than that. So let's say it's 12 million. That means that the national party could raise $12 million in amounts of up to 35, whatever the current limit is for your larger donors.
Yeah, and it just got raised. I don't remember what it is, but it did just get raised.
And, for example, say, okay, this money is going to go to buy television ads for the presidential campaign that are, obviously generating inquiries to reach out to to get new members. So and I personally think that would be a very valuable thing for the party to do, to do that, to have a way of having people be able to donate larger amounts of funds and know that it's going to something like advertising. Obviously, we already do that with ballot access,
right?
But we're usually at the point now. We're at the point now that by the time the nomination occurs, most of the state ballot access is present in most of the states, and the ones that remain, it's a relatively speaking smaller amount of money. I think that, as I recall, it required something like $50,000 to $100,000 post nomination to complete the ballot drives. I know we kicked in a bunch of that, and I know that the National Party kicked in a bunch. But by that point, donors are less interested in ballot access and more interested in things that they're going to be able to see on the television or see on, that they are able to see and say, oh, that's where my donation is going.
And JG had said, and just so you know, JJ, in case you didn't know, if you had been paying attention to the suspension motions, the kick-ass parliamentarian that saved my ass, that's a JJ. So all hail JJ. So JG said he's under the impression that the limited attention voter, average voter, pays attention to politics on Super Tuesday would be totally limited to the duopoly candidates. It's easier to garner attention.
No, you're absolutely right that on Super Tuesday, that is where the attention is. So what I would be thinking of is that the window opens up after Super Tuesday. By Super Tuesday, normally we've got a pretty good idea who the Democrat and who the Republican candidates are going to be. Sometimes it's whatever the one is that comes after Super Tuesday. But usually around Super Tuesday, by that point, most of the other candidates have gone. The people that were thinking, well, maybe if Rand Paul got the nomination, are looking, going, right. Rand Paul's not going to get the nomination. Oh, maybe Tulsi Gabbard will be for the Democrats. No, that's not going to happen. Well, Bernie, nope, not happening. So the people that are not happy with the Clinton-Trump or Trump-Biden choices as examples, that's when they start looking for, well, who else is out there? And so if you can have that burst of publicity that comes with the nomination occur right about then, I think that's the earliest that you can get the benefit of it. And you can get it later than that. We got a real good burst from the nomination that we had here. We were basically the interview requests came in faster than our ability to handle them, to be blunt. And having that occur earlier would be better. I don't think you can get. I think that before Super Tuesday, the media focus is so much on who's going to win Super Tuesday, who's which person Democrat's going to get the nomination, which Republican's going to get it. That there's no room for the narratives about third parties. That window opens up after it's going to be Biden versus whoever.
Well, and we're coming up on the hour, and I promised you we'd be an hour. Though, oh my God, but you touched on the points I really wanted to. I'm probably going to ask you back, not on this topic though. I want to talk to you about Archimedes.
Okay.
And because there's some LNC members still very interested in it. I'm still very interested in it, and I think it's a period of our history we don't know too much about. But I really appreciate the insight you gave here. I think it's going to give some of the newer members who are really raring to change something food for thought. Though you did mention earlier, and we'll just put a bug in everyone's ear, that earlier in the year still might be a good idea, just not necessarily the year before.
Yeah, that would be my, again, from my experience with this, that would be my my read on it. Again, I've been involved with the 92 campaign with Maru. I was involved at the state level with I was national director in 96, or sorry, chair in 96, executive director in 2000. And I was the campaign manager for a candidate who did not get the nomination in 2004, Gary Nolan. So I've had some involvement at some level with 5 of the presidential campaigns in one, either directly or in the case of chair and executive director in the role of supporting the nominee after they receive the nomination.
All right. Awesome. Well, I'm going to let you go, Steve, and I'm going to do my closing comments, and I'm going to have you back on for some of the historical stuff. I really appreciate it. I think you helped a lot of people.
Very good. I'll take care and have a great evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, everyone, I hope you enjoyed that. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I did notice still a little bit of lag that I need to do some troubleshooting on my computer. But what I think it is, I'm going to start scheduling interviews for either later or earlier. I'm on Comcast. My neighborhood takes a hit about this time. Everyone is, you know how the cable is. Everyone is on it. So I think that's part of it, because it's not my wireless, because I'm on Ethernet right now. So I'm going to try to fix that. But the audio was fine. It doesn't match up with the video the entire time, but the information is there, which is what I cared about. But I do have some things to troubleshoot, and I actually think it might be that my laptop is a little too old for streaming, and I might need to get a Mac Mini or something with the new processor chip in it. And I didn't get to say this in the intro because I forgot, but I wanted to be sure to add this now. I had said this last show that I had to delete, but just so that you know, because you all know that I don't give my praise out lightly, I consider Steve one of the best chairs this party has ever had. As I've said before, good Nick is also one of the best chairs this party had. Not bad Nick, but good Nick. And though Steve and Nick are, I consider, the top 2. So take that for what it's worth. For those of you who value my opinion, I hope you will then take that into consideration as you consider Steve's words. So I will see you guys. I'm going to be on Joshua Smith's show tomorrow. I'm also going to be on Unsafe Spaces tomorrow, talking about New Way. At least I think that's what we're talking about, which is an island off the coast of New Zealand that I think 1,500 libertarians could go to and take over and have much better prospect than New Hampshire. No offense, New Hampshire. I want our own country, though. So have a good night, everyone, and I will see you soon. Love ya. Bye-bye.
gotta take what you're given, that's how we live it. Don't be mad at the system, it's simply how we've existed. I hear a lot of people talking like they politicians and choose to be an accountant because it's safe in the business. Not